In the world of electric vehicle charging, we must continue to push for the adoption of open standards and reject proprietary closed providers. This will mature the industry beyond the current Wild West. Open standards allow us to improve uptime, foster innovative, best in class solutions, and ultimately provide a better driver experience. This is what we desperately need to advance EV adoption in the US.
Broadcasting from Washington, D.C., this is Insider's Guide to Energy.
This episode of Insider's Guide to Energy EV miniseries is powered by Power. Power helps your business transition to electric vehicles by simplifying charging, managing payments, and optimizing your charging data. Welcome to the Insider's Guide to Energy EV series. I'm your host, Chris Sass. With me is Neil Rydell, my co-host. And today we're going to talk about open standards and how they can impact and make the driving experience much more interesting for EV drivers. Particularly here in the United States, we're having reliability issues with our charging infrastructure and people are concerned. And one of the solutions is to adopt open standards and make sure that things work well together and to define what reliability is and make sure we're all working towards the same goal. Today, we're joined by Blake Jessen. Blake is going to walk us through his thoughts and experience of how this could go and what we could do better to improve the EV experience. Blake, welcome to the program. Blake, welcome to the podcast. Why don't you start by telling us the state of EV adoption in North America today? I think that's a logical beginning for this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're in the U.S. 3 to 5 years behind other parts of the world that are, looking at 35% of adoption in terms of new passenger vehicles, right? So if you look at California, that's the closest to that standard, and the rest of the world far below it, reaching around 7%. I think it's the last that I saw. So we've got a long way to go. But I think if we continue to push for open standards, it's a great way to get there.
Now, we're talking on a day where the news from Tesla wasn't particularly good. I think their shares are down about 8% today. There's a first time or one of their times where they're dealing with less demand for Tesla product globally in the high-end EV market. And some of the analysts I was hearing this morning talk push that back to the charging infrastructure. They blamed a couple of things. They blamed some Chinese entry and lower end vehicles that Tesla doesn't play in, but they also said in the North America market in particular, it was charging infrastructure. What does that mean? So we're early, we're behind folks. Does that mean the rest of the world has the charging infrastructure
I
figured
think
out
it just
and they're ahead of
means
us?
other parts of the world have been doing it longer and are delivering on a much better customer experience. You could consider that uptime, and you could consider that advanced functionalities like plug and charge and auto charge, right? So I think in the US, the most important thing for us to focus on as an industry is when a driver pulls up, plugs into the car, are they going to get a reliable charge?
And yet here I am sat in the UK, and one of the number one debates we're facing at the moment is reliability of charging. We've been building charging infrastructure for a very long time now, 15, 20 years, and some of that kit is old, unreliable, doesn't work with new models, and therefore is the US perhaps blessed with the fact that it can catch up, it can move faster, and it can overcome some of the challenges of reliability that we're now facing here in Europe.
Can the US catch up? So can you elaborate?
Yeah, I mean, we've got such old equipment in some places that we're now having to go around and rip stuff out. Whereas actually, you've now got best-in-class quality. Can you build that faster and better and get a better network than we've got over here?
Yeah, I think so, right? And it's about sorting through who are those quality providers, right? You've got 22 new DC hardware OEMs in UL just from South Korea alone, right? So you've just got a flood of new entrants coming in. And so I think it's one, are we all going to be speaking the same common technological language, OCPP, to be able to integrate all those new chargers into the infrastructure? And I think the other thing we're seeing is best in class coming from other places of the world, right? So we work with providers around the world like Chempower and Alpatronics that are taking an already successful recipe, an Alpatronics case from Italy, to the U.S. Right, and so I think that shows promise for sure in terms of, hey, we've already done it, we've already proven it, and now we're adapting our technology to the U.S. So yes, I think in short, the U.S. can benefit from all of the learnings that have happened in other parts of the world.
It's super interesting to hear you quote those particular names of Alpatronic and Kempower, because a few years ago they were companies that didn't exist, no one had ever heard of them, and now they're the desirable charge point to install. Why is that? What is the key benefit you think that these guys are providing that perhaps some of the guys who haven't made the cut are delivering?
Yeah, I think they're delivering on the most important thing, which is uptime and quality. And so we've been, as a software provider, we've been doing this for 12 years. We've got a learning algorithm that's capturing all the unique error codes of these manufacturers. We're doing this across 1,500 different makes and models of chargers that are certified on our platform. So we've got a wealth of operational data on the different hardware manufacturers and have a good sense for who's getting it done and who isn't.
When we're talking reliability, what exactly do you mean by that? What is a reliable charging infrastructure, and where are we focused in this conversation?
Yeah, that's a great point. If we're talking about agreeing on open standards, let's first agree on what uptime is, right? I think there's a lot of misinformation on how uptime is reported. Again, Wild West in the US. Certainly, NEVI is very clear on how it defines uptime and the teeth behind that uptime requirement if it's not met. But certainly, I think as a starting point, we believe uptime should be defined at the port level, right? So I think there's other providers out there that are reporting uptime at the site level, right? So for example, you've got 4 chargers, one of them's down, but the other 3 are working. The site is 100% up. Think that's not fair. So when we look at uptime, we look at the port level.
That's really fascinating. The UK government has introduced some legislation last year to try and address this reliability question. They've determined, like you suggested, that it should be nearer the port level. They're actually working at an EVSE level, which is the supply equipment that sits behind that connector or that port. But they're using OCPI as the basis of that standard. Do you
Sure.
think that's a sensible thing or a bad idea?
No, I think that's absolutely sensible. Yeah.
So in theory, we're agreeing that we need some form of common reliability standard and a common language to describe it. However, what we've started to establish is actually the consumer doesn't care. The consumer just wants a charge. So as far as they're concerned, even if the charger is reporting is available, they don't care. They just want it to work.
Yep.
And therefore, I still think there's a gap between the consumer experience and what the software says it should be able to do.
Yeah, agreed. Absolutely. So I think it's a really complex ecosystem that has to come together to deliver on uptime, right? So it starts at the software network operator level. We deliver a 99.99% availability. So you need to start at a high level of availability so that every bit in the ecosystem that flows down from there it can provide that industry leading uptime as well. So from there, hardware, it's got to be quality hardware. And then your service provider, right? They have to have the ability and the operational tools to see what's happening at the site, to keep those chargers up, to roll trucks quickly if need be. But certainly it's orchestration of a really complex ecosystem to provide that uptime.
And then the kind of issues we start to see that consumers then complain about is icing, a non-electric vehicle parking in an electric vehicle charging bay. You can't really tell. How do you manage that in reliability? Credit card readers or card readers on machines not interfacing and therefore not providing a reliable data set. What other issues are you starting to see or try and overcome to really help improve that consumer experience?
Yeah, I think the number one we're seeing is connectivity, right? So we're only as good. The hardware is only as good as the site connectivity, and that seems to be the first point of failure and the largest point of failure. So what we're seeing is SIM providers that have built-in redundancy strategies that they can switch between carriers. So I think that's a unique thing to consider when trying to build reliable infrastructure.
And then from the user experience, so they get there, they either find a car parked in the space, or the network's not getting there and they can't get their billing or their information through. Um, what else are we going through? You called it the Wild West. It's early innings. So
Yeah.
is this the same experience if I'm driving a Tesla and Tesla's network, or if I'm driving one of the many EV choices I have today? What's the user experience like today in North America?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head, Chris. It's I think the experience. I think Tesla's created a great experience because they've built it from scratch and it's end to end, right? So that they've controlled that quality and had to. They were really an industry leader. So the industry didn't exist, the standards didn't exist, and they had to innovate. So I think they've brought the industry to a great point. But now, all the providers that are coming in, all the auto OEMs, we really need to push towards the open standards for everyone to work together. So, my experience, the charging at networks outside of Tesla is some flavor of awful. So you've got to you've got to download different apps, right? So you need to start by downloading the app, having payment ready to go, swiping cards, tapping. It's a different experience every time. And so the drivers really don't know what to expect or potentially even how to find or navigate to the stations. So again, I turn back to open standards as a way to solve this. The more OCPI roaming agreements that can be in place between the various providers, that'll help drivers navigate to the different find and navigate to the different chargers seamlessly. With the right agreements in place, they don't need to download different apps, right? They can all do it within whichever network provider app they have chosen. So I think that's one way to improve. The other would be plug and charge and auto charge, right? So the idea that you're not fumbling with payment, you're not fumbling with apps, you're plugging in and you initiate a charge. Everything is handled on the back end. The new OCPP standards 2.0.1, they're allowing for plug and charge and auto charge support. So as we migrate to those standards, you're going to see a much larger adoption of those, and that's going to go a long way to improve that customer experience.
So I guess what I'm wondering is you're kind of making statements with the magic wand here, right? So if we get this interoperability or these agreements between carriers and they share information and everyone gets standards, the user experience gets better. But is that implying the infrastructure is not part of the problem too? Is it just billing and connectivity that I'm worried about? Is that what's making my experience bad, or is it that there just isn't connectivity today? What is it more than just the
it's
user
certainly more than
experience?
the user experience. It's the reliability of the charging infrastructure. Is it going to work when I plug in? And it's also the availability. There's not enough charging infrastructure in the places where it needs to be. And to that point, we're limited by availability of power and grid capacity. That's a major issue. So I think if you look at some of the segments that are experiencing the most pain there, electric trucking, for example. I sat down with one of the majors that are deploying electric trucking hubs across the U.S., and they indicated they're oftentimes asking for 4 times the amount of power that a utility can give them. And to get the rest, good luck. You're waiting years and years, right? So I think all of those things are contributing to the problem that we have today.
And we hear this a lot. The biggest limiting factor on rolling out networks is grid connection, or the speed at which you can get grid connection. And it's sad because ultimately the grid has been perfectly optimized for the energy requirements we have in place today. And as soon as someone comes along and tries to boost that energy requirement, you get a problem. Do you
Yep.
see any particular initiatives being driven out in the US to enable those, grid constraints to be overcome?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the low hanging fruit there is to take the power that is available and use it in a smarter way through software, right? So you're looking at uh, optimizing and managing that load across the available chargers by prioritization, by specific or dynamic set points. But really, that is the least capital intensive way to manage within the given constraints. Beyond that, you're looking at spending some pretty significant dollars, right? So adding renewables, um, that's going to significantly change your capital outlay and your ROI. Or adding battery, right, to manage, and we're seeing really unique solutions out there that you can take half the amount or less of available grid power and still get the charge that you need by using batteries.
And one of the things that we've seen a bit of over here in the UK is people have done exactly that. They've rolled out chargers at a 150 kilowatt nameplate capacity. They put two of them in the ground. They've only got 100 kilowatts of capacity between the pair of them. Suddenly, the two drivers turn up and they're pulling 50 kilowatts each, and they're standing there complaining about their experience. How do we overcome that? Is there a way that we can signpost to drivers that the upgrade is coming? It's going to get better soon, but at the moment, it's not a full nameplate 150. Is there something we can do to help drivers?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is the experience today. I think the challenge you're today, you're still dealing with a lot of early adopters, right? You haven't hit the sort of that mass adoption curve yet, and so the early adopters are typically willing to have less of an experience or put up with a lesser experience. Today, when you pull up to a charger, you're often sharing power with the other drivers that are there, and depending on your state of charge, your experience, your kW output is going to be significantly ramped down. So I think yes, I think signage could be a helpful way to let drivers know that that's going to happen, to set that expectation. That can be done within the app, to let the drivers know ahead of time that there's a range of charge that they're going to receive. But it is just the state of charging today. As a driver, you're going to have to be prepped that you're not always going to get that full amount of power.
Yeah, it's a huge educational battle. I've had the experience of meeting Porsche Taycan drivers who've spent 100,000 British pounds on buying this beautiful car. They've turned up at this high-powered charging site, and suddenly they've got to start understanding that their 800-volt architecture doesn't work with the 400-volt capable charger, which doesn't have full capacity. And unfortunately, some of our drivers are now pretty much mainstream drivers, and that's
Yep.
leading to quite a few complex conversations, which usually results in the statement, it doesn't work or it's not ready yet. And
Yeah.
that's a hard thing for us to overcome.
Yeah, that's fair. I think it's all about education, right?
But do we really want to educate the market or build the software so I don't have to, right? When I pick up my telephone and dial my mom, I just want to talk to my mom. I don't care about the signaling and how many switches I went through and whatever happened. I wanted to make a phone call, right? When I'm into transportation, I want to hop in my vehicle and go where I need to go. Or if I want to go drive my fancy Porsche, I want to go fast and around fun corners on my way there. But I don't want to maybe learn all the education. So how do we mainstream this in North America so that the average person doesn't have to become an EV expert? Or are we saying that's not possible? There is inherent education needed for this industry to be successful.
Yeah, I think it's certainly possible, just not possible where we're at today. We need to work towards that standard, and likely meet in the middle. I think that new EV drivers get to experience a whole other host of benefits that can make the inconveniences worthwhile. Right? I love that I don't I have almost zero maintenance on my EV, right? I think that's, for that, I'll do better planning on where to charge and make sure I plug in at home, right? When I get home. So I've got to charge in the morning. So I think there's, it's just, Americans are habit driven, and we need to create and establish new habits. And so part of that is education. Part of that is just improving, to your point, Chris, on the experience, so that it's more consumable by the masses.
All right. So as we drive this conversation forward, you come from a software company. We're talking about software. Maybe let's extrapolate what it is that Drives does. Like how are you bringing value and helping manage this process? Like what is it you guys do to make my EV experience better?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a combination of technology and experience. So on the tech side, the platform is used by the Open Charge Alliance that manages OCPP standards to certify new hardware. So because of that, 1,500 different makes and models are certified on the Drives platform. So really, open interoperability is one of our key mantras. From there, uptime. And so we're operating some of the largest networks around the world at 98.5% uptime at the plug level. How do we do that? So again, it's tech and experience. So the tech is we're ingesting the unique error codes of the various manufacturers, and we are remotely troubleshooting and automatically troubleshooting based upon those error codes. And then the AI algorithm is learning what's working, what's not, over 1,500 chargers, 12 years of experience, hundreds of millions of events. We're really amassing a just operational wealth of data.
Yeah, we've had the privilege of working with a number of Drives customers, and one of the things that we can consistently say is it's easy to connect with, it's easy to work with, and I think the bit that businesses like ours ultimately are trying to do is take a huge amount of complexity and hide it from the user. So the user, as Chris might just said, can ring their mum and get through to their mum and have that conversation.
That's right.
Um, but behind that wealth of experience, you've got hundreds of people who've built this technology and are constantly maintaining it. You're now, one of the largest software providers in the world for this
We are.
solution.
Yeah, we are 150 dedicated to just the drives solution. 90% of that are product engineering, tech focused, but now part of the Vontier Corporation. So Vontier is based in North Carolina, 3 billion in assets and 9,000 employees. So we've really got a large U.S. presence to build on.
And therefore, innovation, driving new technologies, driving new solutions is clearly part of what you're focusing on. What can we expect from you next?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Vontier is a holding company of various mobility focused solutions. And so, not only now is it just size and scale, but it's what can we do to integrate the various technology providers. So, some examples: Sparkion is a sister company that manages on-site batteries. So now we've integrated the ability to manage on-site batteries into our tech stack, along with the EV chargers. So, we can manage anything. Could be an asset, a charger, battery storage, renewables, breakers, smart breakers. So we can manage that all within, and orchestrate all that within the platform. And then I think the other really interesting one for me is Teletrack Navman is aggregating telematics data, working with some of the largest providers in the industry. We're taking that telematics data and ingesting that into the horsepower of the drives back end. And we're able to inform really interesting predictive decisions for fleets. All right. So we know when a vehicle will be arriving, the state of charge. We can know, what's happening with, on-site prioritization. What's the scheduling that needs to happen for that vehicle? So some really interesting things to come.
Yeah, there's a really cool ecosystem as you add layers of data together to simplify that driver experience. You briefly mentioned plug and charge earlier. What's the position on plug and charge? I mean, you're a software provider, but clearly you have to influence the hardware installers, the operators, to adopt this. How are you getting on with that?
Yeah, it's being forced, or it's being guided by some of the largest customers in North America right now. So we just spent the last month testing with the major auto OEMs and the new vehicles coming out across different hardware providers on our software platform. And one of the test procedures was plug and charge as well as auto charge. So auto charge for us is and for the industry a bit more simple to initiate and to I think to adopt, but not quite as secure as plug and charge. So some providers are turning to Hubject as a way as a middle where provider to make that more simple. But we're supporting both currently today within the platform.
So for the listeners, the vehicle pulls up. The vehicle has a certificate on it. The charger is already ready. It has a certificate on it. There's a handshake between the two. That's all automated, and you get that Tesla style experience of pulling up and plugging in. And effectively, your software is supporting all of these guys with managing that supremely smooth charging experience.
That's right.
So
Where
what happens next when we get into a world of more vehicles adopting this? Because right now, as I understand it, we've got a very limited number of vehicles and a fairly limited number of operators using this solution.
Yeah, that's right. Um, we need to see more adoption from vehicle OEMs to allow that to happen. But I think all the majors are pushing that way, right? And so I do think that it will be an adopted standard in the coming years.
where are we along the way? You mentioned heavy fleet and fleets, right? So yeah, I get that, every driveway having an EV may be a vision of the future, and we're not quite there yet. But the fleet vision should be further along. So what's the charging infrastructure like if I want to run trucks? If I'm in California and I want to get rid of my internal combustion engine truck from California and I want to go from like LA to Houston or something like that. Where are we on that journey?
The corridors are being electrified as we speak. And so there's already a handful online today. And by the end of the year, believe that you'll be able to make the journey across the West Coast and have several options where to plug in. And then as you look 3 to 5 years out, there'll be more options, more trucks. We just expand upon that infrastructure. But it's happening now, which is really exciting to see.
All right. So when you say it's happening, how are they getting enough power to these spacing along the route? So if you're going to go along the West Coast there, are the utilities putting in infrastructure or substations? And I mean, because we're not talking individual cars. So how are we getting the kind of power to get the charges that's meaningful for a fleet and a reliable fleet to use it?
Yeah, I think that the providers are working with the power they can get, and they are pre-planning, pipes, wires to plan for additional infrastructure when utilities can provide it. Some are looking at renewables and on-site batteries to make that availability power go yet further to our earlier point. But yeah, I think where it's really about trying to match adoption of availability of vehicles and infrastructure. And so where we're at today, you don't see a lot of electric semis out there just yet. So the infrastructure we have in place is adequate for where we're at today. Will it be adequate for the future? Absolutely not. And so that's where we've got to get creative with technology to stretch that availability of power, and we've got to continue to lean on utilities to provide more where they can.
Now, you mentioned the West Coast corridor is an early mover. It sounded like where will the pockets of these early movers be? So where will I start seeing fleets electrifying, at least for semis and heavy trucks in the near future?
Yeah, West Coast, East Coast, and then to connect west to east, right? So it seems simple and intuitive, but that's how I think it's going to happen.
And do you guys support the emerging megawatt charging standard to enable, these heavier vehicles to get that really high powered charge?
We do, yeah. We support that. We see that already happening in other parts of the world, and we see that certain providers are close to being able to provide that in the U.S.
Yeah, I think one of the things we've observed here in the UK, we have one EHGV stop in the entirety of the UK that we can currently use for larger vehicles officially. But realistically, we're expecting to see more and more of these high-powered chargers coming to life, and it's great to hear that you're starting to simplify that experience. I've particularly enjoyed hearing about how really the open standard ecosystem is something that you are, really being a flag carrier for, because ultimately this is where we can tie together multiple sets of hardware, multiple sets of software, multiple vehicle types,
Yeah.
multiple driver experiences into something which, in Chris's language, enables you to ring your mother and be able to get through to them directly. And that experience is really what we need more of, not just in the US. In my view, we need that globally. So it's great to hear that you're driving that journey.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also a difference of um, best in class versus, the one throat to choke. Right. And so I think, other parts of the world that are 3, 5 years ahead, we find, as the industry matures and customers become more sophisticated, they tend towards a best in class approach, right? So they want to be able to choose best in class software, best in class hardware for the application. In the US, I think it's just a metric of where we're at today. Customers still seem to want that easy button, right? And so they oftentimes will go to providers that say, hey, we can do it all in house. But again, as that maturity happens, sophistication, I think the realization is that no one provider can do it all really well. And so I think that's one thing we'll see here in the U.S. is providers moving towards a best-in-class strategy.
All right. So as we move to that best in class, you started this interview by saying it's about standards, standards, standards. I think I've heard that a few times through this interview, that this makes things better. I always like to ask the last question of one of our shows is a crystal ball approach. So where will the North American EV market be 12 to 24 months from now? And you're welcome to hang your hat on the standards and just see how far you think we're going to get.
Yeah, that's fair. I think I'll start with, we really saw a tough. So let me start over. A year ago, I think we came into 23, the industry, with really high hopes, and I think that providers were forecasting major gains in revenue, and there were major investments being made in Buy America technology and spinning up manufacturing, and the industry, as a whole, cooled off a bit. EV sales were still chugging along, but I think we had moved out of post COVID times where you couldn't get your hands on chargers for months and months, and now there were plenty of chargers available. And so that really sent many companies into a bit of a tailspin, right? They missed revenues, they missed their guidances. Stocks are at all-time lows. Companies are flailing at the moment, and some of the largest in the industry. So that's not great for creating confidence for drivers and would be EV purchasers. So I think we're going to continue to see some of that, right? We're going to continue to see companies go under, others get bought up, consolidation. We're going to see a lot of new entrants come in. So I think it's going to be a bit Wild West for the next 12 to 24 months, for sure. And it'll be interesting to see who has a seat when the music stops. But coming away from that, yes, like I think the industry will move towards adoption of standards. Manufacturers are already starting to move towards the next version of OCPP, so OCPP 2.0.1, which supports these advanced functionalities of plug and charge and auto charge. It supports better communication of error code data between the manufacturer and the software provider. And I think it's really a necessity for us to continue to advance EV adoption.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time to come on Insider's Guide EV and share your insights with us. I'll be sorry to see folks go, but anytime we're in an emerging nascent market, companies come and go. That seems to be part of the cycle, and there's going to be some consolidation and things down the road. So we'll see how good you are when we come back 12, 24 months and see what your prediction is. Thank you so much for being a guest.